Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we are in Matthew 13, talking about 7 truths about the kingdom. These are taken from the 7 parables that Jesus is going to tell. So, in Matthew 13, there are a few verses at the end of it. You notice we're going to cover verses 1 through 50. There's technically a little concluding statement about 51 in 51 and 52, but it requires more explanation than I'm going to have time for in the basic sermon. Probably. So I think I'll cover just the first 50 verses, just kind of summarizing the parables. And there's other stuff in these verses as well. Jesus talks about why he preaches in parables. I'm not going to cover that today. It's just kind of summarizing the 7 different parables and learning some lessons from them, even though we are going to read all of the first 50 verses, so you'll see some of that other stuff, and I just won't say much or anything about it. The book of Matthew is interesting because it is divided into 6 distinct sections, and they are congregated around 5 distinct sermons, as they're sometimes called, or different speeches that Jesus gives. These are Matthew 5 through 7, which is usually called the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 10, Matthew 13, Matthew 18, and Matthew 23 through 25. The interesting thing about these 5 sermons is they are chiastic in nature. If you don't know what a chiasm is, or some people say chiasm, I was reminded of that last week when I brought up a chiasm and somebody said, I thought it was called chiasm. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it, right? But I say chiasm, you can do whatever you want to. You have these 5 different ones. Basically, if you don't know what a chiasm is, well, it's a Jewish literary structure, or at least primarily Jewish from what I know, where the first object and the last object mirror each other, the second object and the second to last object mirror each other, and then it's all building towards some kind of central point, whether that is made up of one distinct point or if it's 2 that kind of parallel each other, as it was last week in Ecclesiastes 5 and 6. Either way, it's about building up to a point and then coming back down, right? You have a series of truths that build up to one central point, and then you have the same series of truths in reverse order that re-emphasize all those things you used to think about, but it's still pointing back to that ultimate middle section. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus explains to us how to get in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 23 through 25 is an address to, starting with the Pharisees and scribes, which says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." In other words, it details the people who won't get in the kingdom of heaven. Chapter 24 is the same way. It's about the end of Jerusalem and the end of the world by extension. And also by, Jesus just literally talks about that. But regardless of exactly where you draw that line there, it's about end of Jerusalem, end of the world, and there's a big component in there about the people who are going to end with it because they don't listen to what Jesus says. Or chapter 25 is, it has 3 different parables in it. Matthew 25, with the 10 virgins, 5 of whom were ready for God and 5 of whom weren't, and so they don't get in the kingdom. And the talents, people who use their talents are in the kingdom, and people who don't are not in the kingdom. And ultimately, Jesus divides the sheep and the goats. That's also Matthew 25. And so you see, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is who gets in the kingdom. Matthew 23 through 25 is who doesn't get in the kingdom. Matthew 10 and Matthew 18 are parallels. Matthew chapter 10 is an address to the disciples when Jesus is sending them out on a mission to go and preach to people who have never heard of church before, who have never heard of really Jesus before. They're preparing the way for the Lord among not the Gentiles, technically it's Jewish ethnicity, but among people who have never heard of Jesus before. How does someone who's a Christian deal with those? At the same time, Matthew 18 is the mirror to that. Matthew 18 is how does a Christian deal with other Christians within the church who are doing something wrong? If a brother sins, what should I do about it? Well, go to him in private, and then take a couple others, and then, bring it before the elders, etc., etc. And so how do you deal with people in the church, or out of the church? How do you deal with people in the church? Those two are parallel. And it all centers around this middle point, which is Matthew chapter 13. Which is, we talk about how to get in the kingdom, we talk about who's not in the kingdom, we talk about how to deal with people outside the kingdom, we talk about how to deal with people inside the kingdom, but we still don't know what the kingdom is. And that's a problem, because Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Christ, the son of David. Kingdom and kingship is central to who Jesus is. And so how exactly do we understand that? What kind of kingdom are we even talking about? There's a reason the entire book of Matthew hinges on Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus decides to give us 7 parables to invite us into the realm of the kingdom of heaven, to explain to us a bit about what the kingdom is. That's why this chapter is so important. It's central to the entire book. And so there's a reason why I've taken the first 5 minutes to kind of explain why it is the center. You need to pay attention to this if you want to know what Jesus' kingdom is all about. These are 7 parables Jesus tells us to communicate how the kingdom works. And by the way, when I say kingdom, I'm going to use that term interchangeably with the term kingdom, because kingdom can sometimes refer to heaven ultimately, and ultimately, I mean, that is what God's kingdom really is heaven eventually when we all get there. And when the world ends. But there's also a sense in which the kingdom is for here on earth, and the kingdom is the church. And so, I will use those terms interchangeably. When Jesus is talking about, final judgment and stuff like that, we're probably talking about the heaven side of kingdom. When Jesus is talking about cleaning up the kingdom for eternity, he's talking about cleaning up the physical church that's on the earth so that they can move into heaven and then become the finalized version of the kingdom of God, if that makes sense. So I'll kind of jump back and forth between those definitions. I figure may as well get that out of the way now so I don't have to clarify it a bunch later. All right. Matthew 13. I'll go ahead and read the first 50 verses. And again, we're not going to cover this extensively, but I do want you to get a picture of all the parables and then what Jesus says surrounding them. On that day, Jesus had gone out of the house and was sitting by the sea, and large crowds gathered to him, so he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd was standing on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, Behold, the sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell beside the road, and the birds came and ate them up. Others fell on the rocky places where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up immediately because they had no depth of soil. But after the sun rose, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. Others fell among the thorns, and the thorns came up and choked them out. But others fell on the good soil and yielded a crop, some 100, some 60, and some 30 times as much. The one who has ears, let him hear. Verse 10, the disciples came up and said to him, Why do you speak to them in parables? And Jesus answered them, To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has, shall be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in their case the prophecy of Isaiah is being fulfilled, which says, You shall keep on listening, but shall not understand, and you shall keep on looking, but shall not perceive. For the heart of this people has become dull, with their ears they scarcely hear, and they have closed their eyes, otherwise they might see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and return, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they do see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I say to you that many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Listen then to the parable of the sower. Verse 19, When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is the one sown with seed beside the road. The one sown with seed on the rocky places, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no firm root in himself, but is only temporary. And when affliction or persecution occurs because of the word, immediately he falls away. And the one sown with seed among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, and the anxiety of the world and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. But the one sown with seed on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100, some 60, and some 30 times as much. 24. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and left. And when the wheat sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also became evident. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, "Do you want us then to go and gather them up?" But he said, "No. While you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest, and at the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, first gather up the weeds and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." 31. He presented another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a person took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than all the other seeds, but when it is fully grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the sky come and nest in its branches." 33. He spoke another parable to them. "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 sata of flour until it was all leavened." All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak anything to them without a parable. This was so that what was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. "I will open my mouth in parables. I will proclaim things hidden since the foundation of the world." 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." And he said, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So, just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one who has ears, let him hear." 44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid again, and from joy over it he goes and sells everything that he has and buys that field. 45. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls, and upon finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold everything that he had and bought it. 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. And when it was filled, they pulled it up on the beach, and they sat down and gathered the good fish into containers, but the bad they threw away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth and remove the wicked from among the righteous, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. "Have you understood all these things?" They said to him, "Yes." And Jesus said to them, "Therefore every scribe who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings out of his treasure new things and old." Those last couple of verses, verses 51 and 52, may or may not read those on Sunday. Brief explanation on what that means. Every scribe is someone who would have written out and very much been familiar with the Old Testament. Every scribe who becomes a disciple of the kingdom of heaven, in other words, every guy who's familiar with the Old Testament who becomes a disciple in the New Covenant, who becomes a Christian, he will be like the head of the household who brings out of his treasure new things and old. Basically, you'll have an enhanced understanding of the Old Testament if you would convert to the New Testament. I think that's what he's saying. For those people, there were several in the first century, such as the Pharisees, who some of them did convert to Christianity, and I imagine having that kind of Old Testament background, converting to Christianity, really helps you understand what the Old Testament was about the whole time, but also helps you appreciate the things that God has now provided that are better than the Old Testament time period. Basically, the point is, you should be a Christian. You should be in the kingdom of heaven, and that's the driving force we'll get to at the end of the section today. So we have these 7 truths, right? 7 parables that Jesus tells, trying to communicate how the kingdom works, but we need to do a little bit of background stuff first. That's the wrong one. There we go. We need to talk about organization a little bit, because it's not just that it's not that Jesus just kind of like said stuff for 50 verses. There's a lot going on here, and so we question exactly how were these 7 packaged, and how exactly can we understand them. Some people say these are unorganized. They're just 7 things that Jesus decided to say. I think Jesus is smarter than that. I think Jesus is more well prepared than that, and so I don't really accept that. It could just be that they are 7 stories along the same general theme of something, kingdom of heaven, hand wave away, but this is unsatisfying to me, and it also ignores some very clear similarities in them. At the very least, the seed and the leaven are very similar, and the treasure and the pearl are very similar, and even, I would argue, the sower and the tares are very similar, and so that would ignore a lot of the connective tissue that's clearly there between the 7. I don't have a definitive answer for how these 7 are organized, but I don't think they're just kind of thrown together. I don't think they are unorganized. Some people have suggested that it is like this. It is one parable and then 2 sets of 3. So the first parable is parable of the sower. 2nd through 4th is one section. 5th through 7th is the second section, or is the third section. And I see value in this. Number one, verse 3 does not start out with, it just starts with saying, behold, the sower went out to sow. Whereas when Jesus tells the other parables, he presented another parable to them, verse 24, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like this. Verse 31, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, 33, etc., etc. All the other 6, the latter 6, begin with the kingdom of heaven is like something, whereas the first one just kind of starts out with the sower went out to sow. And then we go from there. And so I do think there's value in separating the sower parable out from the other 6 at the same time. It does make sense that 2, 3, and 4 would be grouped together because the tares parable, you notice that the what's usually called the tares parable, I'll get to this when we get to that section, verses 24 through 30, and then you have the mustard seed and the leaven, and then you have the explanation of the tares parable in 36 through 43. And so it does seem like those form a unit, and so 5 through 7 maybe form a unit. But when you think about the dragnet doesn't really fit with the treasure or the pearl, and so this is mostly satisfactory, but not entirely. Some have suggested that this is made up of pairs, 3 pairs, and then the separate one is at the end. And that kind of makes sense. The sower goes with the tares because both of them are talking about people who are, out farming in a field. The seed and the leaven are obviously similar. The treasure and the pearl are obviously similar, and the dragnet is a little bit separated. However, this makes sense kind of thematically, but with the tares parable, the explanation the parable itself comes before 3 and 4, and the explanation comes after 3 and 4. So it kind of ignores that placement. And again, I like this, but I'm not exactly sure that that's what Jesus is going for. The other thing that I've seen suggested is a little bit more complicated, but it's separated. It's the sower. The first parable is separate. The second parable, the tares, and the dragnet at the very end form a little pair there, and then within that larger pairing, you have 2 pairs, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. I think this one makes the most sense. Again, you have a question on, why is the tares explanation after 3 and 4 instead of right along with the tares? But I think that makes sense because the tares on the beginning and the dragnet at the end help position all of the parables in light of the final judgment, whether good or bad. And even with the tares explanation placed where it is, it does still make sense because 2 and 7 being a pair makes everything talk about final judgment. And so it makes sense that 2 could wrap around the other end of 4 and still kind of have an influence on it, because ultimately they're all being said in light of judgment anyway. The point of all of this is, I'm not exactly sure how Jesus wanted this organized. I'm not exactly sure what he was going for. We have at least 3 explanations that do a pretty good job of covering most of the possibilities, and if I had to go with one, it's probably the latter one. That's the one that makes the most sense to me. But if you don't understand that, or if you don't like that and prefer one of the other ones, I like the other ones as well. Just as long as we recognize there's something more going on than just, there's 7 random stories. As long as we can agree there's some amount of organization, I mean, you do you. I don't really care which one exactly you think is right. Or if you have another supplemental idea, comment it down below. Apparently YouTube likes it when I say that. I never say that, but I rarely say that, so that would explain several things. I don't know what point Jesus wanted to have exactly, but here's the value of it. The more we think about what the possible organization can be, the more you have to think about the parables. The more I think about where the sower has to be placed, I think about the themes of the sower and the ideas of the sower, and suddenly I remember that I've learned quite a lot from the sower, even without meaning to. And so maybe one of the reasons Jesus said it in this way is for us to come up with a couple of our own pairings, because it makes us engage with the material more than it might otherwise. And there's even a section, verses 10 through 17, on, why are you speaking in parables? And Jesus's basic explanation is, I want people to think about it. And so maybe even this kind of structure helps us to be thinking about it. Ultimately, this is all about the kingdom. Again, I think the last explanation is probably the best one, but you have your own opinion, whatever. What's more important is we recognize this is about the kingdom, and we can talk about what that actually means for the sake of the kingdom. 7 different truths about the kingdom, and it goes one by one for every parable. Each parable, you can dive into these in detail and dissect them a lot further. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just kind of giving a surface level overview. And by all means, look into this later on your own and do better study and find more truths and such like that. But here are some overarching themes about what the kingdom of heaven is. The kingdom is open to all. Let's talk a little bit about the sower. This is a section that includes both the sower, why am I speaking in parables, and also the explanation of the sower. But verses 3 through 23 talk about the kingdom, and it's a declaration that it's open to anyone. A sower went out to sow. Where did he sow? Did he just sow in the road? I mean, if you're a farmer, right, where do you throw your seed? You should you should throw your seed in your personal field, and yet he doesn't. He throws it in his field, but he also throws it in the rocky patch that's somewhere near his field, and he also throws it in the thorny patch that's somewhere near or in his field, and he also throws it in the road that's around his field. The seed is everywhere. God is an indiscriminate person. No respecter of persons is the line from the New Testament. Everyone has an opportunity to listen. God just kind of throws it out there, and if you want to listen, you're welcome in. Will you accept God's words? Well, the point of the parable is no. There are a lot of people who won't. Only those who are properly receptive to God are going to listen to him, and yet different people are more or less willing to work with God, but God gives the opportunity to everyone. And the nice thing about the sower is, we think about the road, and the road never listened to the seed, and the rocky soil listened a little bit, but not very much. The thorny soil listened a bit, but not ultimately. The good soil actually listened and was receptive, but the good thing is, your thorns can be weeded out, and your rocks can be broken, and even the road, even as hard dirt as that is, run a plow over it a few times, and it turns right back into a field as well. And so wherever you are, whatever kind of person you are, whatever your natural inclination is, it may take a bit of work to prepare yourself to listen to God, but you can do it. And God offers that opportunity to anyone. Ultimately, it's up to you whether or not you listen to God and whether or not you want to follow him. He's giving you an opportunity, and you're ultimately not going to have an excuse come Judgment Day. So make sure that you get all the trash out of your life and actually pay attention to him. Become that good soil that God is looking for. The kingdom is open to all. No one is excluded from it except by choice. God offers it to everyone. You get to decide whether you want to be in it or not. Here, understand, ultimately the application is verse 23. The one sown with seed on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word, but not just hears it, he understands it. Not just understands it, like got it in his mind, but he indeed bears fruit and produces. Hear, understand, and then work. That's the responsibility of us as humans. God wants you. It's like an old recruitment poster. Even if you're stubborn, he's trying to help you. He's trying to get to you. It's up to you whether or not you want to listen to him. The kingdom is open to all. That is a fundamental truth about the spiritual kingdom that Christ has declared and established. Truth number 2, the parable of what's usually called the tares, is that the kingdom accepts the righteous people. Again, there's a bit of a distinction on this. The kingdom is open to all. The seed is sown on all sorts of ground, but ultimately, there's only one type of soil that's good, and you want to make sure that you are the righteous ones. The parable of the tares is often called the parable of the tares, or the parable of the weeds among the wheat. Actually, if you were to look at this, here's my pedantic soapbox for just a moment, as if it's only just a moment. Verse 24, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. what you'll notice is the parable of the leaven. Well, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. The parable of the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. Just realized I forgot to actually make that note in a later one. We'll talk about the pearl of great price, which is actually the parable of the merchant seeking pearls later on. Jesus is pretty specific with that. This is not the parable of the tares. This is the parable of the sower 2. This is the sower part 2, as I usually like to call it, just to kind of be pedantic and make it stick out in people's heads. The kingdom of heaven is like a man. The man, in this case, is the Son of Man, in verse 37. In Jesus' explanation, hey, this is me. This is Jesus. What is he doing? He's going out, he's sowing the seed into the field. That's wonderful. But then an enemy comes in and sabotages it. Basically, the sower, Jesus, provides good. The enemy, the devil, provides bad. And both grow up together at the same time. The point being that the Master Jesus does not immediately pronounce good and evil and destroy based on that. He says, let them grow together. Let them exist together. And there is a day coming, that's called Judgment Day. There's a day coming in the future where I will distinguish between the two of them definitively, but today is not that day. Right? We're leaving that for judgment later on. It doesn't mean that the weeds are safe. It means that God judges in his time. And that's really important to understand when you think about an application such as the kingdom being, the church today. It doesn't mean Jesus is planting good in his field, in his kingdom, right? But it doesn't mean that everybody who's in the kingdom is going to be good, or everybody who's in the church, or everybody who assembles with your local congregation. It doesn't mean that everybody in there is going to be good. Actually, what he says in verse 41 is the Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness and kick them out. Okay, so in God's kingdom, just be aware there will be some bad apples in churches. There are a lot of people who are put off on the concept of church. They are not very receptive to that idea because they don't like the people who are in church. And you know what? A lot of church people are great, and there are some church people who are real stinkers. That's true. But God's going to deal with that at the end. Right. What's more important? Is it more important that I feel comfortable with absolutely everyone that I am around, and I like all of them, and I can smile pleasantly at all of them, and I enjoy spending time with everyone that I associate with? Or is it more important for me to be righteous and know that God is going to deal with those who are unrighteous at the last day? If your church is full of people who are evil and corrupt, maybe it's not a good church, right? But every church is probably going to have one or two people who are not actually Christians, who are just kind of there for the game and not really there for the righteousness or the faith. And understand that. Ultimately, the kingdom it's open to all, but it only accepts the righteous. And there will be a division between righteous and evil in the last day, if not before. We want to make sure we are good soil. That's a reminder to us, right? It's possible to be in the kingdom, but not really be in the kingdom. It's possible to be in the physical church, but not actually be in the spiritual kingdom of God and heaven forever. And so be careful who you are. Make sure that you are not actually a weed on the inside. We want to be good soil, not the weeds that also crop up there. Only the righteous stay with God eternally. So examine yourself and make sure that you are on the path of righteousness. Third truth about the kingdom, third parable, this is the parable of the mustard seed, verses 31 and 32, is that the kingdom is outwardly unimpressive. The greatness of the kingdom doesn't look like all that much, and you would kind of be forgiven for saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. This is God's kingdom, so theoretically it should look like the best and strongest and most impressive thing on the earth, and yet it doesn't, because the kingdom is not meant to be physically impressive, it's meant to be spiritually effective. We'll talk about this in the leaven in just a moment. We come to human things, and we expect it to be grand and glorious and super impressive, but it's not that. Instead, like a mustard seed, it is small, physically, outwardly unimpressive, but inwardly capable of decent potential. The mustard seed is impressive because In verse 32, it's smaller than all these other seeds, but it becomes larger than the garden plants, and it even becomes a tree. That's incredible. But think about that. Even so, a lot of times people thinking about the mustard seed say, wow, it becomes a tree. That's crazy. Yeah, but it's not a very good tree, right? Think about it. There are a couple of different species. I was looking this up and trying to figure out what exactly Jesus was referring to. There are a couple of different species of seed, of mustard seed, that this could be. One of them, what he's probably referring to, from what I saw, generates a height of about 4 to 8 feet. So on average, maybe a height of 6 foot. So almost as big as me, right? Right around as big as me. It's not a very impressive tree. I spent a long time, I spent a few years living in California. We had redwoods out there. Yeah, you know how big those are? Those are, 100, 200 foot, something like that. Massive things. And then you're telling me I should be impressed with a 6 foot tall tree? Some people suggest that this is one of the larger variants, that it could even get up to, 25 or 30 foot tall. Okay. I currently live in an area where there are cactuses that average 40 foot tall. And they're just everywhere. So even if your tree is 30 foot tall, there's still my basic cactus in my backyard, metaphorically speaking. I don't have one of those yet, but the cactus in my backyard is larger than your tree. The kingdom is not meant to be physically impressive. That's not the point of the parable of the mustard seed. The point is, this is an impressive plant compared to a tomato plant, but people will not be impressed by the outward aspects of the kingdom. The outside isn't the selling point. So stop focusing so much on the metrics and what it looks like. That's not the important thing. A lot of people boast about the church that they go to, or a lot of, preachers or whatever it is, boast about the church that they lead and that they teach at and that they preach at and stuff like that. And they boast because they have a lot of people who come to it, or because it's a very large building, or because it's very rich, or because, whatever the statement is. The fact is, none of that stuff matters. And the fact is, really, that stuff shouldn't matter. Actually, the kingdom is never built to be super big and impressive and man glorifying. The kingdom is about internals. And that's why we have to talk about the leaven. The truth is inwardly effective. The kingdom is inwardly effective. That's the real selling point of this. It's not about what impresses people. Most people wouldn't be impressed by the church as it really is, not all those fancy man-made churches to glorify man and not God. The church is not about all this external stuff. Most people wouldn't be impressed with it. In the same way, most people wouldn't be impressed with leaven either. You just get a pinch of leaven in verse 33 and you hide it somewhere. You can hardly see that. But the point with leaven is not that the leaven looks so impressive. The point with leaven is you can tell where it has and hasn't been. Leaven is kind of an invisible force. A woman takes some and hides it in a bunch of flour. Great. Just a little bit of leaven and a ton of flour. You wouldn't be able to look at that at first and say, oh, there's any leaven in there. But then you come back to it 3 hours later when the bread dough has expanded and is overflowing the sides of the container, and you realize there is leaven in it. Even if I couldn't see it from the outside, even if it didn't look good to me, I am impressed by how effective that was, how it really changed people. Yeast works invisibly, but it results visibly. People may not be impressed with the kingdom as it looks. People may not be impressed with your church of 30 or 20 or 60 or 100 people or whatever it is. People may not be impressed with the size or with the condition of the building or with the beautification of it or with the money that comes in. They may not be impressed with any of those things, but that's not important. What's important is we are growing and changing as people. We are becoming righteous and becoming good. Right? What's important is shining your light out so people see your life and realize that it's changed, and you don't act like everybody else, and you don't do the things that other people do, and you don't engage in those same kinds of sins and evils because you've changed. Something has come into you that has changed you from the inside out. That's what the kingdom is for, is an internal change that manifests in external ways in each individual person's life. By the way, if your life does not evidence any kind of internal change, that might be a notification that you're not actually in the kingdom. You're not letting it affect you or impact you. You need to actually do some things to change yourself. This is self-evaluation. Am I good soil? Am I wheat? Or am I a weed? Am I actually changing? Am I actually going? Am I actually growing? And I think that's probably why why Matthew chooses to kind of organize it in this way, or why Jesus now explains the parable of the sower part 2, or the parable of the tares, because this is what you're reflecting on. Have I actually changed? Well, keep in mind that the Son of Man will remove those who have not actually changed internally. The kingdom of heaven is meant to change you as a person. It's meant to make you righteous. And if you're not letting that work, or if you're not engaging with that work, you need to reevaluate whether you are actually in the kingdom or not. And so we jump topics again. Truth number 5, the kingdom can be found by complete accident, verse 44. This is an emphasis on the kingdom itself. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, starting in verse 44. Not everyone goes out searching for God on purpose, but a lot of people do stumble upon him. This guy in verse 44, he's looking for something. We're never told what he's looking for. He may not even know what he's looking for, but he knows value when he finds it. The important thing here is that he finds and secures the treasure. There are some people in the world who are just lost, right? Who know that something's wrong, and know that life isn't satisfying, and know that none of these physical things are giving them any meaning or purpose, and they are empty shells, and they're looking for something, and they don't know what they're looking for, but they're desperately trying to find it. That's the situation for this man who's out in the field. He doesn't know what he's missing, but he's going looking for something, and he ends up stumbling upon God anyway. You don't have to know what the answer is to be able to find the answer. You don't have to know what the answer is to be able to start a search and eventually stumble across it. God comes up in the search, and eventually it all just works out. The kingdom can be found by accident, or it can be found by people who are seeking it. Notice, the kingdom of heaven, as verse 45, is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. It's not like the fine pearl itself that a merchant ended up finding. That would be, basically a repetition of the hidden treasure. The kingdom of heaven itself is like the merchant who is seeking. There are some people who know that they're lost and know that God is the answer, and so they start looking around. I think this would be most analogous to a pearl evaluator looking for the best pearl and finding it and eventually settling on that and securing that is most akin to people who they know that what they're missing is God, and so they start looking through different religions, and they start saying, okay, well, what's the common religion in my area? Catholicism? Okay, that doesn't fit. That doesn't follow. Okay, not that one. What else? And then they go through kind of like this, a religion list, and they keep going to these different Christian denominations or non-Christian other religions, other heresies like that. People who are engaging with all these different religions, they're knowing God is the answer, but they don't understand how to get to him. And the kingdom of heaven can be sought out like that. There's nothing wrong with either approach. The point is, however you find the truth, whether you are looking for it or whether you just stumble across it, you need to hold to the truth. That is the key important thing. The kingdom of heaven is built on that truth. It needs that truth. It requires that truth. And if you go seeking it, if you find that truth, you need to keep it to be in the kingdom of heaven. God really doesn't care what soil you start as. He cares where you end up. He doesn't care if you start looking with intention or if you start out by accident and just kind of stumble across it. He does care if you actually hold to the truth that you know, or if you then keep abandoning it and go somewhere else instead of listening to what he has to say. God cares where you end up. And so, ultimately, that's a question of judgment. Where do you end up, and where does God end up putting you? And that's why I think it it fits to make 2 and 7, the terrors and the dragnet. I think it fits it makes sense to put them together because ultimately the kingdom rejects the wicked, and we circle back to that theme. Again, 2 and 7 are a pair, I think. All of this is in light of the final judgment. Where are you at? Who are you? What are you looking for? How have you found it? Have you found it? And if so, have you held to it, or did you move past it? Because the fact is, when God sends out the dragnet into the world, the kingdom of heaven is sent out. It is open to all, like the sower says, and yet, ultimately, only the righteous will be accepted in. The push in the parable of the sower part 2, or the parable of the tares, is burn the weeds, but gather the wheat into my barn. We'll gather out of the kingdom all the stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness and throw them in the furnace. But, verse 43, then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. There's a big emphasis on the righteous people and their deliverance there. Whereas with the dragnet, you have the counterpoint. You have a big emphasis on the unrighteous people, the bad they threw away. The angels will come forth and remove the wicked from among the righteous. They will throw them in that furnace of fire, and in that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's no mention here in the dragnet of the good things that happen for the righteous people. There's just a mention of the bad things that happen to the wicked people. The kingdom is open to all. Anyone is welcome in, wherever you came from, wherever you started at, whatever brought you to God in the first place. You are welcome to be in the kingdom. You're welcome to be in God's kingdom eternally. You're welcome to be in the physical church that's here on the earth as well. That's great. But you're only going to make it into that eternal kingdom if you are truly righteous and actually in the spiritual church. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people around the world who go to church, who go to some kind of church on, Sunday mornings, and they worship, and that's great, and then they leave, and then that's great, and they just don't really care. Those people are not making it in the eternal kingdom of God. God is looking for the wheat that produces something. God is looking for those who are genuine seekers. He's not looking for the fish who hang out with all the other fish while it's convenient. No, if you're just wanting to hang out with all the other fish, then I'm going to throw you back in the sea and you don't get to be accepted into the kingdom. If you just want to hang out with people, that's not going to get you to heaven. So, keep your priorities straight. Right. Make sure that you're actually being righteous. There's a judgment day for a reason. Righteous people remain, but the unrighteous are ripped out, and you don't want to be a bad fish when God sends forth his angels. That might sound funny, and it kind of is funny. It's a funny picture to think about, but it's really serious. Just don't do it. Just be good. Be righteous. Because God accepts the righteous. So all sorts of questions for personal evaluation, right? What soil am I? What do I produce? What impresses me? Or what do I value? These are different tests for us to know whether or not we are in the kingdom. But here's what I ultimately know. I know that number 1, sower parable, the kingdom produces things for God. I know that number 2, the tares parable, I know that God will judge that produce. I know that number 3, the mustard seed, God will judge the external produce, which we all can see. I know that number 4, the leaven parable, God will judge the internal produce, which only he can see. I know that number 5 and 6, I need to make sure I'm in the kingdom. Whatever brought me there, whatever initiated that, I need to make sure I'm actually with God. And I need to remember, number 7, the dragnet. I need to remember not to be removed from God's presence. I got to be a good fish. Right? I got to be a good piece of wheat. I got to be good soil. I have to do something for God. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. They said yes. I don't think they really did. But the point is, it's the same kind of evaluation question for us, right? Have we understood all these things? And if so, then get in or stay in the kingdom. God wants you in his kingdom, but more than that, he wants you righteous. If you are righteous, you will be in his eternal kingdom. If you're not righteous, even though you're in his physical kingdom, here you go to church on the earth, you won't make it into heaven. And that's a problem. Don't do that to yourself. That's where we'll end it. 7 truths about the kingdoms, the things to meditate on, hopefully things to think about. Parables are good. Parables are useful. By all means, go dive into those and have more of a study on each one of them. I mean, the sower has had a ton of individual sermons preached about it, because it's actually just really good if you go in and dissect it. But hopefully the overview is something interesting and beneficial to you as you're thinking about the kingdom of God and how to get in or stay in it, whatever your particular situation is. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you have enjoyed. Hopefully you have benefited. There's something to take away and something to think about. All sorts of things like that. God bless you, and I will see you on the next episode of Biblical Breadcrumbs. I believe there is a 1 Timothy class coming out this week, and probably nothing on Friday, because I think I preach the next Ecclesiastes lesson the next week, so stay tuned for then.